Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Friday or Saturday if you are live, and happy whatever day it is for you if you're listening to the replay. We are on day 5. Day 5, day 5, day 5. Let me know how the sound is. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. We are going to have a very fun subject today. Hello. Give me 1 second while I readjust my freaking seat. Okay. Yay, your hard book arrived. Everybody was told that wasn't going to come until October, and then lo and behold, it's arriving for people. So I'm very, very excited that it is arriving. Okay. How are you guys doing? I'm going to try to just probably go right into this topic because this is a big one. They're all big ones. But this topic is it's an emotional one. We got a lot of opinions about this subject. We have a lot of history with this subject. We have a lot of stories and there's a lot in this, in the hybridization programs, in the abduction programs, in the reptilian programs. So we got an hour. We're going to dive in. I'll try to save some time for Q&A. But anywho, thanks for being here on day 5. This has been a lot of fun. We have 2 more days, and I'm doing really well. Thank you. I've got a lot of energy again today. Super grateful for that. Super, super grateful. September so far has been amazing. The 2 days that we've been in September, I've been very pleased with September so far. I hope that you guys are doing well. And if you're not doing well, I hope you're being gentle with yourself. When you're experiencing whatever you are experiencing. It's quite the ride that we are on. All right, let's just dive into this subject. If you have not read The Divine Design, we are talking about the book I wrote, The Divine Design. We are talking about chapters, basically 10, 11. I have to be honest with you guys. I haven't read the book since the last time I edited it because I seriously have PTSD from it with me. I don't want to go in and read it. So we're talking about chapter 10, 4D races, chapter 11, which is basically the abduction, hybridization, and implants. And then chapter 12, I believe, is the reptilians and the humanoids. So this is a really big, juicy topic. And because I only have a short amount of time to talk about this, I'm not going to go into all the detail. But I do want to talk about the fascinating pieces that did come through about the abduction program and the hybridization program, and a little bit about the reptilians. I want to preface this by saying that what I share and what I shared in the book is what came through me from the Galactic Federation of Light. It does not have to be, and it is not the only truth. It's not the absolute truth. There are a lot of things that have happened on this planet and in the 12th dimensional grid around 4D races and 5D races. There is arguments and discussions and debates about 7D races and all this stuff. And I don't go into that. I keep it very, very simple. Very simple. And so what we're going to be talking about today is when the abduction program and the hybridization programs began on the Earth and why they began. And when did the reptilians come in, at least from what the Galactic Federation of Light told me, and why did they come in? So if you read the book, you'll remember that about 4,500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, the Earth and the humans were holding a pretty high frequency. Um, the human collective there were groups of humans that were experiencing themselves already in a fifth dimensional field. There were civilizations where they were advancing pretty quickly. And higher dimensional light beings came in to accelerate this evolution for humanity. There was a fifth dimensional grid around the Earth because the Earth was in a third dimensional field. And this fifth dimensional field sort of protected the Earth from fourth dimensional races that were designed and created by higher dimensional consciousnesses millions of years ago. Many fourth dimensional races are what pulled the Earth down into lower frequencies millions of years ago. So when the Earth was redesigned in a third dimensional form, the Galactic Federation of Light put a fifth dimensional grid around her. It's energetic. Higher dimensional consciousnesses understand how energy works. And if you're not vibrating at that energetic field, you won't be able to access it. So if you're a fourth dimensional race, you won't be able to access the Earth if it's encased in a fifth dimensional grid. Energetically, they won't be able to get in. They won't be able to access it. They won't be able to see it, etc. Very difficult for people to understand, and a lot of people will argue this. And that's okay. 5,000 years ago, the Galactic Federation of Light opened up that fifth dimensional grid, and it's sort of like an opening of a gate. And they did it to allow higher dimensional consciousnesses to literally physically come in and participate on the earth plane. Higher dimensional consciousnesses like sixth and seventh and eighth dimensional beings. And they would vibrate their bodies down into much lower frequencies in order to participate with the human that was evolving into higher states, into 5D. These higher dimensional beings couldn't stay physical for very long, an hour, 2 hours, because it was really difficult to move their vibration down into the third dimension, but they were able to do it. And they started elevating the human collective. At the same time, with that fifth dimensional grid opening, because of free will, fourth dimensional races started to come back in. And when I say come back in, I mean participate on the planet again, like they did millions of years ago. And these fourth dimensional races are highly intelligent. These fourth dimensional races exist outside of the fifth dimensional grid that the Earth had around her. And they were existing for a very long time, thousands of years. Grid opened, they jumped in. Now, in an instant, in a now moment, the Galactic Federation of Light closed the grid. People are going to say, well, why would they open it? Didn't they know? I don't know. I don't think the Galactic Federation of Light were necessarily prepared for that. I don't know why they opened it and didn't think that the fourth dimensional beings would come in. That's what they did. So fourth dimensional beings and races, including the Reptilians, came onto the Earth plane 5,000 years ago. As soon as they did, it was about 500 linear years for the human and about 1.2 seconds for the Galactic Federation. They closed the grid so that the fourth dimensional beings couldn't continue to come onto the planet. They closed the fifth dimensional grid. Now, I want you to understand that this fifth dimensional grid is energy. It would be like you trying to access a fifth dimensional field right now. You can't. You can't get into that fifth dimension. How many of you can access the fifth dimensional Earth right now in terms of physically? How many of you can physically stand in a fifth dimensional world where you're seeing things completely different? right? Where it's almost like what the rest of humanity is experiencing, you're not. Now, a lot of you guys are going to say, I'm doing that, but not in a physical manner yet. It's very different energetically to experience a fifth dimensional field. It's than it is to experience a physical fifth dimensional field. It's very, very different. Your body has to be vibrating at that frequency. So these beings couldn't come in. It just was energetically impossible. But once the grid was open, here they come. So now you have these fourth dimensional races, thousands of them, not only on the earth plane, but holding themselves in what we would consider planetary bodies above the earth. And these fourth dimensional races and reptilians were very, very curious with the third dimensional human body. I have never seen these races, the fourth dimensional races, necessarily as evil or mean. I have used the lens of curious. They didn't do the greatest things to humans. But I never saw them as vindictive or evil when I was writing the book. I saw them as almost like rebellions that weren't going to listen to the universal laws, and they were going to try to manipulate energies in order to experiment on human bodies because they were so fascinated by the human. They were very, very fascinated by the physical body and how it could hold consciousness. How can a body like this, dense, this physical, hold a consciousness? How can it hold light like that? And how is it doing that? One of the things that we forgot is that DNA is something that was created for the Earth experiment. Lots of people will argue that, but it was created, DNA was created for and during this Earth experiment. So all the other races that have quote unquote DNA in them is because of the hybridization programs and fourth dimensional beings and higher dimensional beings that learned from this Earth experiment. Holy shit, you can take light codes, you can condense them down into these strands of physical expression like carbon, or a little bit above carbon like crystalline, and you can make physical forms like this. So I'm going to read a little section of the abduction program. I'm going to read a little section of the hybridization program. And when they were showing me the hybridization program, that was more emotional for me than the abduction program. These programs lasted for thousands and thousands of years. It wasn't the abduction and hybridization programs that pulled humanity down necessarily down in frequency in the same way that the reptilians pulled humanity's frequency down. So there's two specific types of fourth dimensional races or beings. There's what the Galactic Federation call the galactics, right, which is the ones that were doing the hybridizations and the abductions, and then there are the reptilians. Very, very different based on what the Galactic Federation has said to me. Reptilians come in and came into the Earth plane to control the human. The galactics came in curious and wanted to explore the human body. Okay, they wanted to dissect it and like figure it out and look at it. The reptilians wanted to control the body. Because if they could control the human body, they could then play in this world. Reptilians couldn't play in this world as like a human can. and they wanted to play. They wanted to control situations and scenarios. Can we control this planet? Can we control these humans? Can we control this situation? And because they understood energy, they knew that they could control humans if they could get into the human body energetically. So reptilians learned how to move into a human body and take over the human body without killing the human body with their energy and their frequency. And it's the reptilians that we are still dealing with right here, right now. Most of the reptilians and most of the galactic races that were doing this were pulled off the earth in around 1920, in the 1920s, which in the book is called the Clarion Call. It was also when the atomic bomb was being created. It was also when massive physical destruction was happening on the earth plane because these races were able to bring the frequency of the human collective down to a very low frequency. I want you to imagine that the frequency of the human collective was about 48%. And if the human collective can get to 50%, then they're in they're it's like the harmonic convergence, right? If you can get the human collective's frequency at a specific frequency, then it can't be pulled back. Okay, same with the Earth. So it was around, I don't know, 5,000 years ago when they opened the grid that the human collective's frequency was about 48%, right? And 50%, it'd be, off they go. You can't pull the human collective back down. And in the 1920s, so thousands of years later, it was around 41%, which is a pretty significant dip in frequency. And most of that dip was because of the reptilians. Now, the hybridization program was intense for humans, but the hybridization program, which is creating hybrid human and galactic beings, it wasn't about destroying the Earth. It wasn't about controlling humans. It was simply about creating different hybrid beings. But it overrid free will, and it created a lot of trauma for a lot of humans. Same with the abduction program. Um, the abduction program was it didn't have the same impact as what the reptilians were doing, but it created a huge amount of havoc and trauma in humans as the programs continued thousands of years after thousands of years, because of humans eventually started literally waking up during these experiments, and then they would remember. There was also during this time, I don't know, maybe, I guess if you were to speak in terms of linear years, 1700s, 1800s, 1600s, 1500s, 1400s, within about 3,000 years of these programs, there were race wars that broke out. And I actually wrote a chapter about race wars. No, not a chapter, a section about race wars, but I took it out of the book. It was just too much, too complex, and it didn't really matter. It was just part of the story. But race wars are when the galactic 4D beings started fighting against each other energetically for human bodies. It's basically why they were fighting. There's only so many human bodies that they could, quote unquote, abduct. So let me read a little bit. I could talk about this for a very long time. This is a very, very in-depth, complicated, confusing, triggering story of part of our history. But it's part of the book because it's still impacting us. The reptilian energies are still impacting us. And it's a huge trauma piece for us. Many of us have memories of being abducted. Many of us still think that these abductions and hybridizations programs are happening on the planet, and they're not happening on the planet anymore. This is also a very triggering conversation that they're not happening in the planet anymore. And many people would argue with me, against me, that that's not true. Um, Experimentations and abduction and hybridization programs are happening. They're just not happening on the planet any longer. So if 4D races and you are interacting with 4D races, then you are choosing to participate off the Earth plane, out of the 5D grid with these fourth dimensional races off planet. So for thousands of years, they were happening on the literally on the planet in portals, energetic portals. Difficult for humans to understand. And the hybridization programs were also happening on planets within the fifth dimensional grid. So maybe you have this memory of being a part of the hybridization program where you remember being on some sort of random planet that didn't feel like Earth, but there was physicality to it. And you know you were there, but you also know that you were surrounded by beings that weren't human, and there were things happening to your body. Um, so yeah, okay, let's do this. Let's read a little bit. And again, you don't have to believe any of this. I could care less if you believe it or don't believe it. This is what came through. And I think, again, with these subjects, we grab so hard to our truths. We want to argue so deeply. Well, this person told me this, and this person told me this, and this person told me this. And it all may be true, and none of it may be true. So we're all learning how to dissect and try to figure out what has happened on this planet and off this planet. So I would highly recommend taking everything that I'm saying right now with a grain of salt. And if it does not resonate, I am not telling you to believe it. Don't believe anything I'm saying. If it resonates, great, right? We get to choose what we believe and what we don't believe. I am simply the messenger of this information. So let's just quickly do a couple paragraphs, and then we'll talk a little bit about the reptilians for a second. So 11.2, if you want to read along, the abduction program. The abduction program was the largest program conducted at this time. So remember, this is around 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. It was created to dissect and study the human body. Hundreds of thousands of humans were abducted out of their beds for the purpose of experimentation. The 4D beings were very intentional and cautious during the experiments. They did not use physically invasive 3D techniques or instruments during the experiments. Again, their intention was not to harm the human form, but to study the human form. These beings were highly intelligent and had access to advanced technology and instruments that would work energetically on the human form. They used high-frequency light technologies to enter the human form. This resulted in very little physical damage to the human body. They did not need to cut into the human form. When the body is in a slightly higher frequency, it's easier to access the inside of the form. I think I spoke earlier, but about how they took the human body. So it describes how they actually pulled the human body out of the physical reality. So when the body is in a slightly higher frequency, which is what they did, they moved the body into a higher frequency in order to pull it out of the physical room that it was in. It's easier to access the inside of the form. Most of the time, they would enter the human body through the eyes. This ensured there were no marks on the human form. They would move energetic probes or light lasers into the human eyes and investigate the human form. Once within the form, they would dissect and study tiny portions of organs, tissues, muscle, blood, and DNA through an energetic laser. During these 4,500 linear years, the 4D beings learned everything they could about a dense physical body holding a higher dimensional consciousness. Through these experiments, they became curious about how the human form was designed and wondered if they could create their own hybrid human. And this is how the hybridization programs began on the 3D Earth. So some of you guys are saying, well, why would God let this happen? Or why would, the Galactic Federation of Light let this happen? It's the same reason they're letting all of this happen right now, free will. It's one of the most difficult things that a human can wrap their head around is free will. And the process of allowing for free will and to not intervene. It's very difficult for humans to get that, to grasp that. 11.3 hybridization programs. The hybridization programs were designed to create new races of beings from the human prototype. The 4D beings wanted to create physical forms that were half human and half galactic. These programs were much more complex than the abduction program and had both a negative and positive impact on the human. Thousands of humans were traumatized, while thousands of humans benefited from the program. The hybridization programs took place on the Earth plane in the same 4D rooms used for the abductions, as well as off the Earth plane on planets within the 5D grid. When we closed the 5D grid, the 4D beings accessed planets to reside in while in the 5D grid. The planets were in 3D, 4D, and 5D fields. This meant they could be experienced in 3 distinct dimensions. The 3D human would experience the planet. The 3D human would experience the planet, whatever planet these beings were on, as a round, dense physical form in the sky. The 4D and 5D being would experience the planet as a physical form that could be used to create their physical reality. Most 4D races chose to use the planets near the Earth plane as the location where they would reside while in the 5D grid. The planets held 4D life for thousands of years. They just couldn't be seen in a 3D field by the 3D human. The 4D beings used these planets to build the hybridization programs. They teleported the human body to these planets using the same 4D portals that were created for the abduction programs. I talk about the portals in previous sections. It was just as easy to move the human body onto a 4D planet as it was to move the human body into a 4D room within the Earth plane. The portals had access to multi-dimensional fields and locations within the quantum field. Once the body was shifted into 4D frequencies, again, this is something that was talked about in earlier sections. So a lot of this is, if you haven't read the book, you're not going to understand what this is. Once the body was shifted into 4D frequencies, it could be moved into any fourth dimensional field, whether off planet or within the Earth plane. The 4D beings often chose the 4D planet option because it was easier to control and create the hybrid within their own familiar environment. I'm going to quickly read a quick part. It's fascinating to read about how they created the hybrid. It's mind-blowing. It's like you're watching a Star Wars movie. So really quickly, the hybridization program began through the abduction program. It was during experiments on the human body that the 4D beings discovered eggs and sperm. When they studied the eggs and sperm, they found human DNA, the 10% of DNA that creates the physical body. They found the human DNA within these structures. As we've discussed, all human DNA holds light codes that hold information. The 4D beings found that the specific light codes within the egg and sperm DNA created the 3D human body. They knew they could dissect these light codes to create new physical forms. They also recognized that merging an egg and sperm created the 3D human body. They were learning how to create new physical forms. They understood they could merge the DNA of a 4D being. Now, why do 4D beings have DNA? Because they were created millions of years ago by higher dimensional consciousnesses that were in the 12th dimensional grid, that were aware of how the Galactic Federation of Light created the human, because they incarnated into the human body. So they were aware of it. So they understood it. And then they created 4D races with DNA millions of years ago. That's in another chapter in the book. They were learning, but these 4D races didn't know any of this. Okay? They were learning how to create new physical forms. They understood they could merge the DNA of a 4D being with the DNA of a human being to create a hybrid being. The physical form would hold 50% galactic DNA and 50% human DNA. They explored two options in creating the hybrid physical forms. So these are physical hybrids, okay? It's very different than, this is going to be complicated. Okay, these hybridization programs that we're speaking of right now are hybridization programs that created physical hybrid beings. Physical, okay, which means that the physical form that was walking around was holding 50% galactic DNA, 50% human DNA. So that body, that form, was half human, half galactic. A lot of people talk about we are hybrids, okay? And what they mean when they're saying that is that your consciousness is a collective of galactic races, perhaps. Like I'm half Palladian and I'm half Octurian and we're hybrids, and I'm a hybrid. That is very different than what they're talking about here. That's very different than the physical hybridization program that took place, because you are not a physical hybrid. You're in a human body. This human body is not hybrid. It was designed specifically from DNA that is strictly from light codes, creating the human body. Your consciousness may be hybrid, which simply means that your consciousness is a mixture of different galactic races. That is a whole different subject, a whole different discussion of how that happens, and it is not part of the book, because that did not have a massive impact on the evolutionary process. But it's definitely an interesting subject. How do consciousnesses become hybrid? It's an amazing way. It's an amazing part of this experience. But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about a physical form that is a mixture of galactic and human. Now, there's most likely all kinds of hybrid physical forms out there. Of course there are. Think of dogs. How many hybrid type dogs are there? You know, there's thousands of different types of hybrid dogs where you go and take your dog's DNA and you're like, holy shit, it's half this and an eighth of this and a quarter of this. So there's so many physical hybrid races out here being experienced in this 12th dimensional grid. We're talking about human hybrids. I hope that clears up a little bit. They explored two options in creating the hybrid physical forms. Option one was implanting the human egg or sperm into a 4D being. And option two was implanting the DNA of a 4D being into the egg or sperm of the human. And then it goes on and on about how they implanted, how they merged, how it started to, grow, how it was birthed. Very fascinating. And again, this subject is people, because of the human language and the word hybrid, there is a huge amount of confusion, arguments, discussion. This subject is massive. It's very, very big, right? Very, very big. All right. Really quickly, two paragraphs. The reptilians and the humanoid. Let's just quickly talk about the reptilians. The reptilians' intentions for entering the 5D grid were to understand the energy within the human form. They were curious about the way energy was held within the human body and how to access and use it for their own purposes. They knew that energy was light, and light was a life force for other consciousnesses, including reptilians. Light created more power or more abilities for a consciousness. If the reptilians could pull energy from the humans, they could then increase their own life force and create more power. When we talk about power, we don't mean control. Instead, we are referring to a being feeling more energetic frequencies within their own form, becoming more alive and electric. It would feel similar to the human receiving a burst of endorphins, so their body feels high or in an altered state. This is what occurs for the reptilians when they access the energy within the human form. Hold on, I want to read one more thing. There's so much. Okay. So in the beginning, the reptilians were pulling the energy out of the human body and using that energy for their own fueling. Eventually, what happened around, I don't even know what linear year it was, a couple thousand years in, they started accessing and moving into the human body. And once they started actually moving into the human body instead of pulling the energy, they then realized the amount of control they could have. And that's when they started controlling the humans more and more. And what we're finding right now on the planet is, even though there's only about 10% of the reptilian races on the planet now, they are in the human bodies. The reason they're in the human bodies now is because in the 20s, when the Galactic Federation of Light started energetically pulling the reptilians off the planet, one of the way energetically, so it didn't matter if they were in a fourth dimensional field, the galactics could still pull them off energetically. What the reptilians started doing that the galactics didn't do, that's why most galactics are off the planet. The reptilians started moving into the human bodies more and more, because if they were in the human bodies, the Galactic Federation of Light would have a very difficult time pulling them out of the human body, because they could kill the human body by doing so. And so the reptilians realized, holy shit, let's jump into these human bodies. We'll be able to stay. And that's what they did. And so 10% of the reptilians that were on the planet for thousands of years are still in human bodies. And the Galactic Federation of Light did everything they could to try to pull them off. But they also didn't want to kill the human body and the human spirit and the soul that was inside that body that was being controlled by the reptilians, because they knew that eventually the human collective would be able to raise the consciousness on the planet high enough that the reptilian consciousnesses within the physical forms would eventually be purged out of that human body, hopefully. So that's what we're dealing with right now when we talk about the reptilians. And again, this is all, take it with a grain of salt. There are probably thousands upon thousands of stories about reptilians. And the reason I don't think too much about this stuff, and I really don't like talking about it, is because it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I think what matters at the end of the day is that we are focused on being human, and we are focused on compassion and empathy and love for ourselves and the rest of humanity. And we are focused on our own shadow and our own trauma. And we are focused on being freaking human. And it's, to me, this was one of the chapters I didn't want to write. I didn't want to write it. This couple of chapters. I really did not want to write it. It's probably why, it's not probably, it's why I took out the race part of the race wars. I don't find it relevant. And the Galactic Federation of Light said it's very relevant. So I wrote it. And I know a lot of people on the planet are very intrigued by this. But if we get super caught up in these stories, which most humans that are awakening, they get caught up in this and they want to learn more and they want to dive in, and I get it, but not at the sake of your own awakening, not at the sake of continuing to feel, not at the sake of pulling yourself out of your own body and trying to almost escape what's actually happening right here, right now. It's important, but I don't know. I think that for a lot of people, it's still kind of crazy that there are actual higher dimensional light beings, right? Like they don't understand that. So this is even more wonky and crazy. So to me, it's like, I mean, we've got so much work to do on the planet. So much work to do on the planet. There is so much happening right here, right in front of us, that we need to focus on, in my opinion. And getting caught up in, these other things that occurred and that may be occurring, and arguing about them is like, yeah, but do you know that there are, you know, do you see the manipulation that's happening with you right here, right now, taking away your sovereignty, your empowerment, your freedom? To me, that's what's important. Can you see the corruption in front of your own face? Can you see the evil that's playing out in front of you? Can you start choosing to no longer participate in it? That, to me, is what's important. Right? And what is so powerful about this book is that when you start to realize what's happened, when you start to realize what we've gone through, we are able to get through anything. We are indestructible. If you imagine that for thousands of years, we were overtaken by these fourth dimensional races that did so much to our physical bodies, and they were here, like in our they were here, they were participating on this planet with us. And I didn't even talk about the implants that were put in to control the human. And this is all we made it through that. We survived. We're traumatized, but we survived it. Right? And so it's about remembering this power that we can hold around this, what we've gone through, and what that nothing's going to stop us right now. This feeling of like the lion and the lioness, like, keep, like, show me what you've got. I'm going to bulldoze through you, like the buffalo, like, get out of my way. Do you remember what we've gone through? We've gone through so much. There's no way you're going to stop me now. That's why it's important. That's why the Galactic Federation of Light wanted it in the book, because look at who you are. Look at what we've went through. Look at what we were able to pull ourselves through. Nothing destroyed us, and nothing's going to destroy us. We will inevitably continue to evolve as a human collective. And the other reason that it was in the book, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. The other reason is that people are still perpetuating this fear-based storyline around the abduction and hybridization programs and that these things are if you'll notice, there's not a lot of it like there was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but it's definitely a fear-based program that keeps humanity in a past that isn't present. And they talk about that in the book, and people do not like that. They will argue against that, and that's okay. You don't have to believe me at all. Please don't if you don't. But from what the Galactic Federation of Light has said, that these things are not happening on the planet anymore, and that there are memories that we're pulling ourselves back into, and that there are experiences in the dream state and in the etheric realm where we may be experiencing this, but it's not on the earth plane anymore. And the more that we can wrap our heads around that, the more we are capable of recognizing just how powerful we actually are, you know? So one of my fears about traveling with this book and going all over the world is, you know, having to have these conversations around this stuff, especially this chapter. These chapters more than anything else, the abduction, hybridization, implants, reptilians. People really love to argue it. So the hybrid humans were never on the earth plane. They never were sort of dropped on the earth plane. They're on different planets all over the place. Probably hundreds of thousands of them now. All different types. Fascinating. And there's a ton of you that have had hybrid children. And a lot of you visit your hybrid children. This just seems so out there. It's so out there. It's so not grounded in this reality here, but it's what happened. A lot of you had hybrid children. Very hard to wrap your head around how you physically had them, but you didn't actually physically birth out. Your eggs were taken, your sperm was taken and implanted eventually implanted, whether it was right away or about after a few months, it was implanted into a fourth dimensional being. And a lot of you have had dreams, you've had memories of these hybrid children. There are so many amazing hybrid children that are like just cheering us on and cannot wait to connect at whatever time that we're designed to connect with these other hybrid races. These hybrid races are not evil or dark. They're not all out to get us. There's some very beautiful hybrid races. There's some amazing planets that are. There's millions of planets, right? You'll be told that there's only 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever freaking lie we've been told, but it's a lie. There are millions of planets, and there are so many different types of hybrid races that have been created. Now, it's not fair to us as humans. We didn't ask. We didn't raise our hand and say, "Please, please invade my body." A lot of humans had not abortions. What's it called? Miscarriages. A lot of humans didn't even know that they had miscarriages. So many females were used for these hybridization programs and didn't even, well, most of them didn't know, but um, had physical issues and didn't realize it was, the egg not connecting to the hybrid sperm that was, or the hybrid DNA that was being inserted into them. Lots of weird stuff. Lots of weird things happened. Not all of them are you would want at the dinner table. That's for darn sure. This is not black or white. There is a lot of gray. A lot of gray. Um, a lot of gray. I have a disjointed traumatic memory of this. Did we choose this? I mean, if you had that's a hard one, and I can't remember what the Galactic Federation of Light said in the book. Maybe somebody can remind me. I think that there were a lot of higher selves that said yes to the experiments and the hybridization programs, and there were a lot that didn't. The free wills was definitely overridden. They overrided free will when they were on the planet, and that's part of what's so difficult to grasp and understand is the negligence of free will, and that's what's so irritating and frustrating is that they weren't even honoring free will. They didn't honor free will. It was like they were a kid at a candy store and there are all these rules in the candy store. You can't pick this up, you can't do that, and they didn't give a shit. They did it anyway. But I believe what the Galactic Federation of Light said was that there were humans that agreed to it, meaning their higher selves. And this chapter, there was a lot of people that skipped this chapter. There's a lot of people that got triggered and couldn't finish it. So you want to be gentle with yourself because it could bring up memories. It could bring up a lot and anger at me for writing, anger at whatever. So be gentle with yourself if you are having a emotional reaction or a physical reaction to this section. Um, you know, it, it's uh It's, just part of it. There's definitely, energies that are not wanting this information to get out with the divine design. Uh, on a personal note, since I released the divine design, if you guys know me, if you follow me, and, my guides are telling me right now, "You don't need to say this," but I just wanna say it. It's not validating it, but it is what's going on. I've never been I've never been somebody that believes in quote unquote darker energies um, infiltrating or impacting my path. Never. Um, I've never believed that something is stopping my mission or stopping my voice. But I can tell you unequivocally that the moment I released the book, I was shown by my guides that there were a lot of forces that were stopping the energetic flow of this book and the energetic messages of this book and the physical fucking book getting out there. So I feel it a lot. I definitely feel it a lot. I don't know why I'm sharing this, but it's I can feel I'm energetically going up against darker energies with this book. And so I think that's part of why I have been practicing not only humility as much as I can, but also the releasing of any control or expectation because I will not fight against the flow of the natural current. I won't. So I won't fight against these energies. I'll let the higher realms fight against them for me. And so maybe if you are feeling like something is stopping you or something is like you're fighting against something or you're pushing against something, sometimes it's releasing that control to something bigger than you that is still you, will move you through it easier, you know? Yeah, it's really it's possible, Lauren, that that's happening. Do we need to cleanse and protect our energies? I don't cleanse or protect my energy. Like right now, I don't protect my energy. Because the reason I don't protect it is because I know I'm already protected. Like the physical body has an energetic field around it designed to keep you safe. It's a natural energetic field. So I don't believe that I'm being physically or energetically attacked. But some people do. Some people are. Some people have that experience. I don't have that experience. I've also never really been somebody that cleanses my energy, and that's because I think I'm constantly aware of what I'm feeling. I'm constantly aware of moving energy through me. And I'm constantly aware of the power of my breath and awareness and all of that to move it. So I never feel like I need to cleanse my energy. Now, there have been experiences where I felt, holy shit, whatever that was, I need to literally take a shower, right? So I guess that's cleansing, and I'll just jump in the shower. But it's very rare that I feel that. I truly trust my physical body and the energetic field. So even if I do feel quote unquote dirty, I know that my energetic field will cleanse it. It's all about how you literally what your beliefs are around it. Entities can get in for sure. I've had an entity in me I've had a couple entities. The reptilians were also created. This will people will argue with this, but the reptilians were created. Now, there are reptilian consciousnesses that exist outside of the 12D grid, okay? There are 4D races that exist outside of the 12D grid. Reptilians and 4D races were not part of the 12D grid, and they were not part of the Earth experiment millions of years ago, because anything that was below a sixth dimensional field could not enter the 12th dimensional grid. So anything that is lower than a sixth dimensional field that is being participated with right now in any way, shape, or form was created and designed inside this 12th dimensional grid. So they're all the reptilians that we experience, that we hear, that we talk about, they were created by higher dimensional consciousnesses inside the 12th dimensional grid. It's no big deal. They existed outside, and they do exist outside the 12th dimensional grid as well. But the ones that are here were created by higher dimensional consciousnesses. Reptilians could not get into the 12th dimensional grid. Reptilians are in a fifth and sixth dimensional frequency. And again, take this with a grain of salt. I'm not here to I'm just here to be the messenger of information, and that's it. And governments have absolutely, unequivocally dealt with the galactics and the reptilians for a very long time, especially when they were still on the Earth plane. And there were actual physical wars inside tunnels, bases with humans and fourth dimensional races. Most of those bases have been destroyed because the fourth dimensional races have been pulled off the planet. By the way, it took years to pull the races out. It didn't go happen overnight in linear time. But there were many governmental agencies that learned a hell of a lot from these races. A lot. And many governments are still in contact, and they still understand this because there are many reptilian energies that are in human bodies that are part of these systems. Um, who are the beings in the UFOs being seen today? There's thousands upon thousands of different galactic consciousnesses that are in UFO quote unquote ships. Thousands. That's like standing on the earth and saying, what dog am I seeing in that huge uh, dog field? What's it called when you take your dog park, right? It's like, I don't know. There's thousands of dogs there. So many, so many. They're all around us. You're galactic. You're higher dimensional. This idea that it's like, oh my God, disclosure is coming, and oh my God, there's UFOs, and oh my God, there's things. It's like, who do you think you are? Where do you think you came from? Like, Like, explain to me who you are as a consciousness. Like, explain to me where you go when you die. Like, if you're not the human body and you know that you go somewhere, then who is the you that goes somewhere? Who's the you that goes out of the body? Who's the you that quote unquote dies? Who's the you that goes to heaven? If your physical body isn't going to heaven, which it doesn't because it gets buried or burned or whatever, who's going to heaven? Who's going anywhere? It's that simple to ask the question, and then everything becomes very freaking simple. Big deal. It's like we separate ourselves from this we are in such a state of separation. All you have to say is, "Who are you? Where do you go when you die?" Then you're like, "Oh, shit, that's a good question. Hmm." Ask any religious person who dies. Who's in heaven? Your body isn't. Ask them. I'm curious what people will say. Your soul? What's your soul? What is it? Who's experiencing heaven or hell? Who's experiencing the afterlife? If you had a near death experience, who was having that experience? It wasn't the physical body. The physical body was laying there on the earth, dying or dead or whatever. So this notion that, oh my God, there's what do you mean there's UFOs? And what do you mean there's disclosures happening and all that we make such a big deal out of these things. And I get it, except that it's like, dude, you're just not remembering. And so you're thinking that it's this big deal. And it's only because you don't remember the freaking story that you've been living for the last 7 million years. The moment you start remembering through this book or any other book of what you've been doing here, then you're not going to look out and be like, "Oh my God, there's UFOs. Wait, what? There's disclosures happening?" And like, yeah, what do you think you've been doing? It's like a slap in the face. I don't know much about the Rh negative blood type. Did dinosaurs exist? That's a really good question. I don't have the answer to that. I've never heard of whether they did or they didn't. They probably did. I'm sure they did, but I was never given any information. I'll never pretend like I know anything. I don't know. I have no problem being like, "I have no idea." I truly only know what is, I don't read other people's stuff. I don't watch other people's things, so I don't get information from other people. I just allow higher dimensional consciousness to share with me, and then even that can be argued. Dinosaurs are real. They probably are. Can you explain how trauma developed after the hybrid program for the soul of the consciousness that experienced it? Well, the soul doesn't experience the trauma. The 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 human, so more of like the aspect that's being experienced inside of the human journey is what experiences the trauma. So, I mean, essentially, the soul does experience it because the soul's inside having that human experience, but your free will is overridden. So it's almost like you're being held down on a bed and somebody's doing something to you that you don't have a choice over. So it can feel very disempowering. There can be this moment of, if anything happens in your life where you feel like you're out of control, you'll freeze, you'll get numb, you'll silence. Um, it's a trauma response. You won't feel safe in the world, you know. You'll feel like things are out to get you or something's out to get you, or, you know, distrust. It's really damaging what happened. So it's a memory that the soul has. The soul itself isn't traumatized. It's a memory the soul has, and once the soul enters back into the human form and starts to have the energetic experiences again, it starts remembering. But Dolores Cannon said that all abductees agreed for this. It's possible. I was told that not all abductees agreed. It's possible that I mean, I think a lot of abductees agreed, and I think a lot of them were taken out without free with not obeying free will. I don't know what astral mapping is. There's a checklist that a survivor gave me. I did a video. I wanna know how to move beyond this trauma. I'm sorry, I don't know what your trauma is. A lot of times the way that we move beyond the trauma is, one, we don't try to move beyond it, but instead we embrace that. We embrace what's coming up. Um, Sometimes the moving beyond is almost a defense mechanism to push that trauma away. So you wanna make sure that, Stephen, that you're not identifying as the trauma. You're not identifying as the trauma. If you're identifying as the trauma, meaning I am the trauma. I am what I'm experiencing. I am who I am what I experienced when I was 7 or 8, then it's gonna be difficult to allow the trauma to just move through you. You wanna start to try to observe yourself as the one that experienced whatever it is, you experienced it. You experienced this, you experienced this, you experienced this, this experience created that, right? So more of an objective lens, and that there's nothing really to be afraid of or to fight against or to try to clean up or heal or any of that. It's in the not trying to heal the trauma that the trauma just starts to heal itself by you almost befriending it. That's my experience. But there's like layers and there's like layers to the befriending of the trauma. All right, I'm gonna get going. They've never mentioned watchers. No. There's a lot they haven't given me, and I'm very grateful for it. If the universe is infinite, how can we be sure of anything? We can't. Anyone that is absolutely sure of something, oof, oof, setting yourself up for failure. Anyone that's like, this is the absolute truth, for sure, 100%. Ouch. I don't know about that one. I don't know. I'm humbly willing to admit that, you know, there are multiple truths out there, you know? Man, I could do like an entire weekend seminar just on this stuff, the abduction, hybridization. I didn't even talk about implants. I didn't even talk about the humanoids. The humanoids, real quickly, are they're hybrids that were created by the reptilians. Humanoids are on the planet. That's a whole other freaky thing. But the humanoids are half like they're a mixture of human and reptilian. Oof, they give me the heebie-jeebies. Many humanoids are in Los Angeles, maybe. What are the humanoid personalities like? I think that we wrote about that. Um, Very robotic, glassy-eyed. Uh, not emotional. Um, Almost like a sociopath. Um, but a lot of sociopaths actually are pretty charismatic as well. Think of like a psychotic sociopath. It's just blank. It's empty. It's very, very empty. I don't know if a lot of people in power are humanoids. That's a really good question. Very, very good question. Do they know they are humanoids? That's another good question. Do they probably know that they're humanoids. They probably know they are. Now, the reptilians that are in the human bodies, there's still a soul that's in there. And so many times, let's just say that like, some really big figure is got a reptilian energy in them. It's like something has been taken over by the human part. Let's say the human's name is George, right? The soul that came in that is not the reptilian's name is George. And so it's almost like the reptilian comes in and takes over. The reptilian consciousness knows it's reptilian, but the human consciousness, George, the soul, doesn't know. And so there's this weird meshing of the human soul, George, that comes in and out with that reptilian energy that comes in and out in control. So it's a very weird, funky experience. And that's why, have you ever seen people that are like, "Oh my god, this person's eyes changed," or um, have you ever been around somebody where it just feels like something's not right? Like on a very, very, like something's just not right when you look at them in the eyes. I've met one person that I'm almost positive had reptilian energy in them, and it was the scariest thing I've ever. It was the freak. I couldn't even look them in the eye. Many times, if there is a reptilian consciousness in a human, you won't. It's very difficult to look them in the eye if you're sensitive. If you're highly, highly sensitive to energy, you won't be able to look them in the eye. It's almost like you feel like they're gonna take over, they're gonna freaking jump into your body. You're like, "Oh my god, I cannot look at this person. What the freaking freak?" And there's a darkness to it, but they're still trying to be very human and funny and lovable and this and but there's, like, dark. It's weird. But there's a lot of humans that just have a lot of issues and can feel the same way, you know? What do you mean, can we talk about dogs? Yeah, the book is in paperback. Go to Amazon or any other online retailer that sells books. It's in paperback, it's in ebook, and it's in hardcover. Oh, shoot, I have a call. Sorry. Shoot, I forgot I have a call. Okay, I gotta go. I love you guys so much. Tomorrow is day 6, and we're gonna be talking about the harmonic conversions, a really, really positive, beautiful, powerful, amazing time in our history, 1987, the harmonic convergence. It's really, really uplifting. It's not like this that we just talked about. um 2 p.m. It gives you hope. It gives you life. It gives you like, oh, we're doing this, we've got this, because we are doing it and we do got this. And we are, continuing to bring in more and more light on the planet, more and more light in our physical bodies. We got this. And the harmonic convergence was the most miraculous, one of the most joyous times on the planet, 1987. So I hope that you guys can join tomorrow at 2 p.m. Thank you so much for being here. And I will see you tomorrow. Lots of love. Mwah.